The ancient Greeks had a word for one of their most common punishments: ostracism. You've heard it, but the way it actually worked, once a year, citizens would gather and scratch a name onto a broken piece of pottery. No crime required, no trial, no accusation. If your name came up enough times, if enough people were just tired of you, you had 10 days to leave, 10 years of exile, for nothing except being inconvenient. And that's one of the milder options. Ancient punishment is one of those topics that sounds like it's going to be a list of gruesome things, and it kind of is, but it's also something else. It's a window into what different societies actually cared about, what they thought order meant, who got to enforce it. And there's one piece of this that genuinely reframes the whole story. We'll get there. Before there were courts or kings or legal codes, there were still rules. There just weren't institutions to enforce them. In small hunter-gatherer communities, the kind of societies humans lived in for most of our existence, punishment was mostly social. Gossip, mockery, the cold shoulder extended indefinitely. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent years studying dozens of forager societies and kept finding the same thing. These groups were surprisingly deliberate about preventing anyone from accumulating too much power. If someone started acting like they were in charge, or hoarding resources, or getting aggressive, the community would respond. Not with a formal trial, with ridicule, sustained, targeted, relentless mockery. The Kung San people of southern Africa had a specific practice around this called insulting the meat. If a hunter came back with a good kill and started acting proud about it, others would criticize it, call it scrawny, unimpressive. It wasn't cruelty, it was a leveling mechanism. Pride was considered dangerous. The community treated it like a threat. And if mockery didn't work, ostracism, actual physical exclusion. In a world without agriculture or supermarkets, being removed from your group wasn't embarrassing, it was potentially fatal. And if that didn't work, Boehm documented cases where a persistent troublemaker, someone who kept attacking or threatening others no matter what, would be killed by group consensus, not by a leader, by the group together, which is its own kind of justice, or at least its own kind of order. The point is, punishment existed before law. It just looked different. It was social before it was physical, and that distinction matters more than it sounds, because of what comes next. The first written legal code most people know is Hammurabi, 1754 BCE, Babylon. Eye for an eye. Famous, quotable, dramatic. But it wasn't first. Ur-Nammu beat him by about 350 years. Sumerian king, around 2100 BCE, and his code is strange in a way people don't expect. It's full of fines, not mutilation, not death. Silver. You injured someone? Pay their family. Knocked out a tooth? Pay in silver. For a surprising number of offenses, Ur-Nammu's answer was essentially compensate the person you wronged and move on. Hammurabi's code is more famous partly because it's more visceral, the lex talionis, the law of retaliation. But here's the part that gets quietly glossed over. The punishment depended entirely on your social class. A free man who blinded another free man lost his eye. A free man who blinded a slave just paid a fine. Same action, completely different consequence. The code wasn't about equal justice. It was about maintaining a hierarchy while keeping it stable enough to function. Ancient Egypt ran a different kind of system. Serious criminals, and people the state simply wanted removed, were sent to the mines. The copper mines of Sinai, the gold mines of Nubia. Some accounts suggest assignment to the mines was understood by everyone involved as a slow death sentence. Not quick, not symbolic, just labor until the body gave out. Rome had the Tarpeian Rock, a cliff on the Capitoline Hill, roughly 25 meters. People convicted of treason were thrown from it, public, witnessed. The Romans were deliberate about that. Execution as a message, not just a removal. They also had decimation. If a military unit showed cowardice in battle, the unit would be divided into groups of 10. They'd draw lots. One man from each group, chosen by chance, would be beaten to death by the other 9. The survivors were then made to sleep outside the camp and eat barley instead of wheat, barley being considered inferior, degrading. The point wasn't just to kill people, it was to make the survivors feel the weight of having killed their own. Collective punishment as a psychological instrument. And then there's Aristides. Greek city-states held ostracism votes, the one we talked about at the start. Each year, citizens could gather and submit names, scratched onto pottery shards called ostraca, and whoever got the most votes above a certain threshold had to leave Athens for 10 years. Aristides was one of the most respected statesmen in ancient Athenian history, called the Just, famous for his honesty and scrupulous fairness. He was ostracized anyway. One account says that on the day of the vote, a citizen who couldn't read approached a stranger and asked him to write Aristides on his shard. The stranger was Aristides himself. He asked if Aristides had ever wronged him. The man said no, he was just tired of hearing everyone call him the Just. So Aristides wrote his own name on the shard. I don't know why that story stays with me, but it does.
Here's the reframe, and it connects back to where we started. Most people assume the arc of punishment goes brutal early, more humane over time. Civilization softens things. And on a long enough timeline, there's truth in that. But zoom in on the transition from pre-state to early-state societies. The moment humans started building cities, writing laws, centralizing power, and something counterintuitive happened. Punishment often got more severe, not less. Before states, punishment was social, embarrassing, exclusionary. Hunter-gatherer communities could mock you, shun you, or in extreme cases, kill you. But the scale of cruelty was bounded by what a small group of people could organize. There were no institutions capable of systematic, sustained torture, no labor camps, no public spectacle designed for thousands of observers. Early states changed that calculus. Suddenly, rulers needed to maintain order over people who'd never met each other, who shared no common bond except proximity. Social shame doesn't scale, so they built systems that did. Public execution, mutilation, branding, forced labor. The Code of Hammurabi isn't the beginning of justice. In some ways, it's the beginning of state violence as policy, formalized, written down, impossible to argue with because the argument was already over. And I think that part doesn't get talked about enough. We tend to treat written law as straightforward progress, which it was in some ways, maybe most ways, but it also meant for the first time encoding into official text exactly who got to hurt whom, how much, and under what circumstances. The law didn't just describe a punishment, it licensed it. What ancient punishment actually tells you is what a society was afraid of, not what they said they valued, what kept them up at night. Hammurabi was afraid of disorder in a stratified society. Greek city-states were afraid of individuals accumulating too much influence. Hunter-gatherers were afraid of someone taking more than their share, of one person becoming more powerful than the group could check. The methods varied wildly across centuries and continents. The fear underneath them was more or less the same. And the Aristides thing, I keep coming back to it. A man so consistently good that it started to irritate people. Voted into exile not for anything he did, but for the specific crime of being a little too perfect to be comfortable around. They didn't punish him for wrongdoing, they punished him for making everyone else feel like they were doing it wrong. That one probably says something. I'm just not entirely sure what. If this is the kind of thing you find yourself thinking about, there's more of it here.